Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. Today, November 12th, marks the 100th day of curfews and communication blackout in occupied Jammu Kashmir. There are 8 million people there right now. Their lives completely at a standstill, with over 1 million Indian military troops on standby, on checkpoints, making life as we know it absolutely difficult. Of course, there's no access to the region for at least the international media. The local journalists are having extremely difficult times in reporting on the situation, and also impartial groups or humanitarian aid organizations are not allowed access. Or what's to say of India's own opposition party members who cannot go and visit and assess the area on their own to get a snapshot of what the situation is like. We'll take a look at this news report.
Today is the 100th day of lockdown in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Pain, agony and distress have hijacked the valley. Kashmir, once referred as the paradise on earth by the first Mughal emperor Zahir-ud-Din Babur, is now the world's biggest open-air prison for over 8 million Kashmiris. After the abrogation of Article 370 on August the 5th by the BJP-led government, Jammu and Kashmir lost what little autonomy it enjoyed under the illegal occupation of India. Francisco Bencosme of Amnesty International says it has become the world's largest prison and a concentration camp.
On Kashmir, last week we came out with one of the most comprehensive updates on the human rights situation in Kashmir, where we documented a clear pattern of arbitrary detention on politicians and activists, cases of security forces abuses such as torture and inhumane treatment, and a communication clampdown which undermined the ability for individuals to reach health services in the region. Second, I would like to highlight the increasing growing trend of anti-Muslim xenophobic backlash in the region.
Kashmir was already the most militarized region in the world, with 700,000 troops stationed there, but it broke its own record when thousands more were moved there in the days before the article was revoked. The Indian government warned tourists to leave the state, and after the 5th of August, a complete curfew and communications blackout was imposed. Landlines, cell phone services and the internet were blocked. International media was denied permission to enter. Those who did get through reported scenes of chaos. Military forces were using live ammunition to disperse unarmed protesters, killing and injuring hundreds. Students from schools and colleges have not gone to school for a quarter of the academic year. Unprovoked search and cordon operations by security forces have terrorized the population as hundreds of minors and men are beaten and hauled off to faraway jails. Businesses have closed down, hospitals are facing increased difficulty in treating patients with little to no medical supplies, helpless when patients die of curable diseases. World leaders have urged Prime Minister Modi to remove the curfew and allow impartial groups to monitor the situation. Prime Minister Imran Khan's moving speech at the UN General Assembly in September raised the issue to a greater extent.
When the curfew is lifted, will be a bloodbath.
To try and understand how the situation looks for Muslims in India specifically, especially with now also the Babri Mosque verdict out, we are trying to assess whether minorities or India as a secular democracy, as Nehru had envisioned it, is that idea, is that dream dead, and how this Kashmir issue itself can be resolved. To talk about this and many other aspects of this conversation, let me introduce the guests who will be joining us right now. We have with us Dr. Moeed Yusuf, who is joining us from Islamabad. He is the chairman of Strategic Policy Planning Cell. And also we have with us from Istanbul, Ms. Ruwa Shah, an analyst. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for taking out the time and speaking to us. Dr. Moeed Yusuf, first of all, congratulations on this new appointment. It is, of course, at a time where relations with Pakistan, with India are very tense, especially with what we've seen in these past 100 days. How is the planning looking like for Pakistan's government on how to move forward in addressing this very tense issue?
Thank you. Look, I think the first thing to say here is that it's 100 days of inhuman treatment by any stretch of the imagination, by any benchmark. you are talking of a country where 100 days there's been a lockdown with security forces, administration, the life is at a standstill, and this is not Pakistan saying it. I think you can pick up anything in the Western press and you will see it. There is an end to everything, and this has to end. You can't just continue with human life and human misery like this. So I think that we need to establish that. As far as Pakistan's position, I think it's very clear. You've seen other senior officials constantly talk about the fact that this is a human rights issue. India has tried to portray it, it's real estate. Well, there are UN resolutions that talk about Kashmir as a territory. Pakistan has stood by it throughout. But at this point, this 100-day lockdown that you're talking about, it is a real human catastrophe. I mean, just take any individual, man, woman, or child. What are they going through? I mean, that's a question that needs to be answered when we talk about, here is a democracy dealing with this issue. You know that before I took up this position, I was based in the US, and I will tell you candidly, this is the first time that I have found even Washington voices, which are very critical of Pakistan otherwise, saying that this has crossed every limit. People are talking about, this idea of values, the US values, Indian values. What is actually congruent about them? Really nothing at the end of the day, very little. So that conversation is taking place. Pakistan is talking about the UN resolutions that have always dictated its position. We've talked about the right of self-determination, and it's true anywhere you go that you cannot oppress and silence. You heard the Pakistani Prime Minister speak again and again, including at the Kartarpur ceremony over the weekend, talking about the fact that if you're going to perpetrate injustice, that is simply not going to bring peace to India, to Kashmir, or to the region, which is what Pakistan ultimately wants.
Dr. Yusuf, you talked about this in August. You wrote about this back then, where you had predicted quite accurately that what the verdict of the mosque would be like. You talked about how India would distract with IMF, with the FATF. All of that has happened now with the kind of pressure cooker situation that is in Indian-occupied Kashmir. 8 million people and their lives on a constant standstill, being washed over by over 1 million troops. What are you seeing happening? Do you think it's even a possibility that the Indian government can now step back and afford to remove this curfew, these lockdowns, especially with the kind of international condemnation that you've highlighted they're getting?
Look, I mean, you're quoting something I wrote in August, and the prediction was unfortunately not difficult even at that time. And I think we haven't seen the end of this, by no means. We are sitting here watching a development which Kashmir is only part of. But you've seen the Indian Supreme Court verdict, you've seen the idea of the citizenship sort of issue in Assam, and it's going to be tabled in other places very soon, I can tell you. This is a neighbor that we are now seeing go in a direction where intolerance is becoming the norm. At least as you sit across the border here and see, that's a worry for Pakistan. When the Pakistani Prime Minister talks about better relations, when he talks about getting past Kashmir to help this region grow, Pakistan is dead serious on that. But you tell me, is there a way to have any conversation, any discussion, when you are making unilateral moves on a territory that is internationally recognized as disputed,
right,
and then essentially not listening to world voices, global voices that are constantly saying that this cannot solve the problem, nor can it actually silence the people where this is being implemented. I mean, there's just simply no room for that conversation.
Exactly, and this doesn't seem to be that India is giving us any space to even work on. I mean, we've seen even Kashmiri leaders who are under house arrest or under behind bars. We've seen Syed Ali Shah Gilani. He's also urged in a recent statement that Pakistan needs to cut all ties, break down all these peace agreements that it has with India. I mean, it really brings into question, do they even stand? Does the Ruwa resolution, the Simla agreement, any of it still exist anymore with the kind of dynamics in play here between India and Pakistan?
Look, I mean, these are very nuanced technical issues. I don't want to get into, how this would shape up going forward. I mean, those issues are separate, and we are everybody is looking at this situation and seeing where this would go. But I want to go back to the fundamental issue. 100 days of blatant human rights violation in a territory that is internationally recognized as a dispute. I would say this for any country. No country has the right to do this. Right? And so the first thing is we have to continue getting the world to recognize what really is happening. Unfortunately, we live in a world where fake news now dominates minds. But where there is reality, it has to come out. People have to recognize what really is happening. And quite frankly, let me make a personal comment. I think of the individual human being in that situation. Would I ever want to be in that situation? That's really fundamentally the issue. And then, of course, you have a dispute to be resolved. And we've seen for 70 years this region held hostage to the issues between India and Pakistan that we are unable to move beyond. I mean, I think from Pakistan, you heard over and over again, you can go back and read my writings as an analyst, or you can talk to me now. I said the exact same thing, that Pakistan and India are actually the region that has to move forward. Otherwise, poverty in this region, the well-being of the people cannot be addressed. But I'm again asking you, how can there be any movement when you're seeing what you are seeing? How can there be any movement when the words self-respect, when the words mutual respect and the words sovereignty, equality have disappeared?
Right. I mean, that seems to be the essential problem here, that India, as we knew it, as it was born to sort of evolve from the Nehruvian sort of idea of secular India, that doesn't seem to exist any longer, and how to have that conversation on the same plane with the BJP-led government, especially since there are no mediators. There seems to be no third party that is taking any kind of effective step to bring them to the table.
Ultimately, the way forward has to be a mutually respected decision on how to move forward, where the self-determination right of the Kashmiris is honored. Right. I am not there, you are not there, many people talking about this are not there, but the people who are there have the right. That's enshrined in international law through the UN resolutions.
Right.
That's
where is the
only
UN
thing
then? That's the problem. Where is the UN then? Where's the US? I mean, where are all the Western leaders? What are they doing about it? The UNSC meeting was great. They got together after 50 years. They talked about it, but nothing really came out of it. The problem is that while Pakistan pushes this and brings it to the world attention time and again, our Prime Minister made a really moving speech in the UN General Assembly, but we alone simply cannot make any difference if the world stage continues to just sit silently, don't you think?
So let me say two or three things here. First of all, you have Pakistani officials, the foreign minister, on the record saying that we do understand that actually, unfortunately, countries are giving preference to their trade relations, to their economic sort of dividends with India, rather than standing up for the human rights issue. So, I mean, that's clear and plain, and we know that. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, even if I were to say to you that, oh, the world is actually not supportive and the world is distracted or whatever, that in no way undermines the stance that Pakistan has taken and the rightfulness of that stance, right? Even if that's not true, but even if you were on your own, we would still keep making the same point, because that is what we believe is the right way forward on this. And the third thing, on a personal note, I'll say, I'm very conflicted. I wouldn't bring this up, but you mentioned my previous writings. Go back and look what I've been saying for years, that India and Pakistan have to come together. Pakistan has to become the transit hub of this region, and economic diplomacy has to drive this region forward. I mean, I am the one who used to get criticism from people on the right saying, oh, this is too liberal a view on India. And then I had to write forcefully after August 5th. I wasn't in this job. Before I joined, I had to write as an independent analyst that the Indian Prime Minister's actions have given people like me a shut-up call. That we talk about working together, economic diplomacy, and here is an answer which says, I don't care. I'm going to do this my way. Well, if that's true, then quite frankly, I don't know where we can go from here if one side has just made a decision that is going to be all unilateral. That simply is not acceptable to Pakistan or to international law.
Dr. Moeed Yusuf joining us from Islamabad. Thank you so much. The chairman of Strategic Policy Planning Cell and advisor to the Prime Minister. We also have with us Ms. Ruwa Shah. Ms. Shah, let's talk about these 100 days and what it has been for the Kashmiris. It's an open-air prison. It is like a concentration camp. This was the Amnesty International person appointed to the area talking about this in front of the House Committee of the Congress in the US just last month. A very powerful statement he gave. 100 days, does it seem to have made any difference on the world stage in getting anything done to take back this, to remove these curfews?
100 days is just a number. We have been suffering for the last over 70 years. But yes, India has crossed all the lines this time in terms of the communication blockade. And as Mr. Moeed mentioned, this has been I think this is one of the world's most humanitarian crises right now. And unfortunately, it has not been talked about as per its intensity of the problem. And on the ground, people are frustrated because that is what India is trying to do. You know, they have they make sure that people tire up. They are not letting you do anything. The education is shut. Even electricity has been shut in the last 5 days with the first snowfall. And such things like, you know, now there is not a very strict curfew on the roads. There is movement, but people are not resuming to their normal lives. And this should suggest that there is absolute abnormalcy on the roads. And this is not normal, what India has been trying to propagate. And this frustration will be channeled in a particular way and will be went out by the Kashmiris today or tomorrow.
And that is a big concern, that what happens if the BJP-led government does remove those curfews on a population of 8 million who are not even allowed to practice their basic rights like their religious practices. I mean, Eid came and went. People weren't able to visit their neighborhood mosques to say Eid prayers.
Right. See, India, the curfew, as I said, is not very strict now. There are forces on the streets, but people are still allowed to move. But people are not coming out. So there is also a sense of lack of leadership or guidance right now. People don't know. They are confused. I mean, it also shows you the mental state of the people, because they have been, so it was a very strategic move to close it down for over 2 months, completely block the communication. And when the communication was partially restored, which is the only postpaid mobile phones, started working again, and a little bit of movement started to happen. People started to take it as a little normal, which even people inside Kashmir, I can say this because I have lived in those curfews and I know how it feels, because you get so stagnated, you get so frustrated with everything. You want to breathe. You have to give breathing time to everybody. And this will, of course, look like breathing time for now, but definitely it doesn't die down, because this happened in 2008 also. For 7 months, there was continuous curfew and lockdown. People were not allowed to come out on the street, although internet was only banned, the telephone lines and everything else worked. But after 2008, we saw continuous, I would like to call it the tehreek, on the streets, the intifada on the streets, the turmoil on the streets. We saw it for consecutive, how many years, till 2016. What was that Burhan Wani and the 20 other youth who joined militancy? It was the outcome of 2008 and 2009.
The suppression,
so
it was the outcome of the suppression. Hold that thought. I want to come back to you, Ruwa Shah, to explore more about the kind of psychological effects it's having on the Kashmiris. This not just these 100 days, but as you mentioned, this has been going on for decades. But here, let me introduce Dr. Tasleem Rehmani, an analyst, is joining us from New Delhi. Welcome to Newswire. Dr. Tasleem, let's steer the conversation a little away from just the 100 days in Kashmir, but also highlight what has just happened over the weekend. The Babri Mosque verdict has come out. In your perception, what does this mean for the Muslims of India?
You see, very simply, if I sum it up, I can say the democracy is dying in India. We know that there are 4 pillars of democracy. One of them is judiciary. Our legislation is already in the hand of the fascists. Our bureaucracy is already colored, and our media is already one-sided to the fascists. And now this was the last hope, the judiciary. And the judiciary admitted in all of it, 1,045-page judgment, that it was a mosque, and a functioning mosque. And it was demolished by an act of vandalism. And still they have given the right to construct a mandir over there, admitting every fact. Ultimately, they granted the right to construct a temple over there. So we see this judgment as a fall of a judiciary in the country and the judicial decay in the country. And that's why I say that it's like collapsing our democracy in the country. In the times to come, we can see the consequences of such a judgment in the country, where the democratic institution may further be weakened, and maybe the voices of the people, the democratic movement of the people can be curbed, and other such voices can be shut down.
But
so this is how
Dr.
the
Rehmani,
common people of the country looking.
Right, but Dr. Rehmani, it is still a big concern that this is being done by the BJP-led government, by Prime Minister Modi, after he has been voted in just recently, the second time round. So doesn't this speak of what the Indian masses actually want?
Actually, you see, this is the culmination of a 30-year-old movement. You know, this verdict has very clearly mentioned in itself that whatever the campaign was launched was totally based on the falsehood about the birth of Lord Rama and the demolition of the mandir, etc. Everything has been proved wrong and squarely false. So this the government which is in power today is the same government which has come to power through such kind of a falsehood. So the country will now get an opportunity to know the truth that the fascist and falsifier people are now governing the country. This is just that the second term of Narendra Modi.
No, but Dr. Rehmani, this is not the only incident. I mean, we saw of course, August 5th, the abrogation of Article 370, the inhumane curfews, the communication blockout, the hospitals in Kashmir that do not have medicinal supplies continuing, businesses going down, children not going to school for a quarter of the year. But at the same time, we also saw now this Babri Mosque verdict. Also in between this, we saw what is happening in Assam. You know, there are 1.9 or 1.8 individuals who now have to prove that they are citizens of India. My question really essentially is that the masses voted government and all of this is unfolding during the BJP-led government's tenure. Is it worrying to you that this right-wing Hindutva agenda is going to dominate the masses' needs and demands?
This has already dominated the masses. The second victory of Narendra Modi is not on the plank of the economy or the unemployment or the price rise or the disturbances in the country. No. The vote to Narendra Modi, the bulk vote to Narendra Modi was at the name of Hindu nationalism. This is the sentiment, the very powerful sentiment in the country which has voted Narendra Modi to power on the name of this nationalism, and that's why they got this kind of a courage to do the Kashmir and to do this NRC issue in Assam, in which they now plan to extend to all over the country. And this Babri Masjid, the verdict is on the same direction. So they want to convert the course of the social, cultural and political course of the country towards the Hindu nationalism. So that's why we say that the two-nation theory on which the country was divided is still working in the country, and now that two-nation theory is getting the full success and the support of bulk of the masses. That's what the unfortunate thing in the country.
Dr. Tasleem Rehmani joined Delhi. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Coming back to you, Ms. Shah, we're running out of time. Now, I wanted to address the issue of the kind of psychological impact this has on people who are living in such dire circumstances. You are originally from Kashmir. You talked about how you've lived through these curfews. You still have family there, and I believe. Tell us a little about the kind of impact it is having on family members who lived in and out under this kind of fear or this frustration that you talked about.
Well, yes, my mother, my brother, and my entire extended family still lives in Kashmir, in Srinagar, and other areas. And I can tell you, all of us are mentally not well. And it's not only my family; it's the entire Kashmir. Somewhere or the other, it has taken a huge toll. There are researches. There has been work done, academic work done on this. That how entire Kashmir, majority population of Kashmir is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders, and now even more so. And it's not only limited to those who are living in Kashmir. It has also affected those who are outside Kashmir, including me and others whom I know. But I just wanted to make one point here that that Mr. Tasleem talked about the Indian democracy. I think it is wrong to call India a democracy anymore. And a Kashmiri knows the nature of its state and the behavior of a state like India very well. It's not new for us. We were not shocked or surprised when the Babri Masjid verdict came out. We have seen in the past at Afzal Guru's time and Maqbool Butt's time, and all those Kashmiris who are still in the jails across India without any charges being proven against them. So there is absolutely no justification in calling India a democracy anymore. And they are not working on changing the narrative and the discourse in their masses. It is already being done. The two-nation theory that happened is just being validated again.
All right, Ms. Ruwa, thank you so much for speaking to us here. We've come to the part of the show. We have to take a quick short break. We'll be back and talk more about what is unfolding in Syria. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now we will be talking to our guests to assess the situation as it unfolds in Syria. Turkey continues its operation in northeastern Syria with the help of the Russians. And as this happens, as they try to push the Kurd-led Syrian Democratic Forces further deep into Syria, at least creating a 20-kilometer buffer zone, President Erdogan has come out and said today that the U.S., who had promised that they would help in eliminating or removing the terrorists from this buffer zone, and Russia also have not held to their side of the bargain. To assess how the situation will move forward and the conflict-mired country where multiple bombings and attacks have raised the casualty count really rapidly, especially in the past few days, let me introduce our guests who will be shedding some light into the issue. We have with us a journalist joining us from Istanbul, Mr. Umar Farooq. And we also have Dr. Yahya Al Aridi, a Syrian politician right now in France, Stratford, joining us. Thank you for speaking to us here on Newswire. Umar, if I can come to you to get an assessment, your assessment on the situation as it evolves. There's already a lot going on across in Syria with the bombings that have taken place, the number of people who are dying. And then President Erdogan showing very clearly, as he's about to visit Washington to speak with President Trump, that he is not happy with how the US and Russia even is holding its part of the deal. What is your assessment on this?
Yeah, the deal was supposed to be a ceasefire, and it was supposed to see the Syrian Democratic Forces and the YPG, which makes up the bulk of their forces, withdraw from a 32-kilometer wide strip across the Syrian border. But the ceasefire hasn't really happened. Turkish-backed Syrian rebels, as well as the SDF, have been clashing in certain areas, sometimes outside of that strip that was supposed to be sort of a ceasefire zone. Turkey and Russia have started joint patrols along the border. So those are sort of one area of some cooperation that's happening. And we also sort of see continued insurgency attacks by groups that are likely connected to the Syrian Democratic Forces, to the YPG, in the towns that Turkey has control over.
So when President Erdogan is going to make this visit, is expected to address this issue with President Trump in Washington, D.C., do you feel like, especially with the kind of reports coming in, that the deployment of U.S. forces, the kind of military equipment is increasing in the eastern part of northeast Syria? Is there concern that this very sort of volatile peace deal, this understanding, might just go south?
I think that Trump has been pretty flexible about what he would like to do with the peace deal, and now it seems like he's more focused on protecting oil reserves that are in the east near the Iraqi border. and he's sort of ordered U.S. troops to move to that area. I think that, you might see like small clashes, you might see bombings that continue in this area. So we don't really know what's going to happen with the peace deal. The other important thing I'd like to say is that this outcome isn't actually making almost anyone in northern Syria happy. A lot of Kurds are not happy because they're losing an autonomous area that they had. The rebel forces are not happy because this means that the Syrian regime is going to come back to that area. Really, the only sort of winners we have here are Assad and his allies.
Stay with us, Umar. Bring in Dr. Al Aridi. Let's get your comments on this. President Bashar al-Assad recently, in a statement, said that he is looking forward to the 2021 elections, the democratic elections, and that anybody would be able to contest them, that there would be, of course, more parties participating as compared to last time. What are your sentiments on this statement he gave recently?
Well, the goal of such statements by Assad are twofold. One, it is occasioned with the convening of the Constitutional Committee in Geneva, which is supposed to write a new constitution for Syria. And he is just in such statements trying to block the work and the activity of that committee by just bringing in the elections, which cannot happen in any way these days. There is no neutral environment, there is no objective one, there is no safe one, and no one can go to elections as such. Another thing is that when he talks about elections and when he talks about detaching himself from any results that could come out of the work of this Constitution Committee, actually he is addressing basically those loyal to him that he's all right, everything is fine. That is said actually by him after half of the population is displaced, 1 million people were killed. We have around 10 million people out of the country or scattered in the country without shelter. And now talking about elections, talking about these things, as I said, is addressed to his loyals, but it is illogical and it is hindering. And it is actually against what Russia, which is the main party responsible for his continuity, is blocking what Russia is trying to do, trying to get a political settlement, achieve a political settlement after 4 years of military action, which is something that's needed to be presented to the world, that Russia is in for achieving a political settlement, not only for military purposes, for killing, for destruction. Now, whenever there is a political event, try to remember Geneva and the different rounds in Geneva, it is usually occasioned and timed with a certain terrorist act carried out by the militias that Assad and his regime brought in order to protect them, the Hezbollah militia, the Iranians, even the Russian intervention. It is occasioned with this military act in order to divert attention from any political process which he and his regime rejected, obstructed, and hindered from the very beginning.
And that's something that Umar also pointed out here, the eastern part of Syria, where about 300,000 Kurds are at the risk of being displaced, where the Turkish troops have essentially established control of this 120-kilometer strip, including Tal Abyad and Ras Al Ain. There is a deep concern from various reports we're learning that of civilians of the Syrian regime coming back. So there is a big question on what will happen to the autonomy of that region.
People actually are between not only one rock, but many rocks and in many hard places. You have the intervention of the Turks, the Americans are there, the Russians are coming in, the regime, and also the National Syrian Free Army. All those are in a state of conflict, but there are agreements between the Astana partners, in particular Turkey and Russia, something that would tranquilize that area and at the same time get rid of the Qasad, the democratic Kurdish forces, which are labeled and treated by Turkey as a threat to Turkey's national security, and at the same time a threat to the indigenous population, where they displaced many people and they created some demographic changes. And now the accord between Russia and Turkey and the talk between the Americans and the Turks hopefully would lead to some sort of settlement over there that could bring the people who were displaced, that could push the federal, the democratic Kurdish forces down into the area, and they are trying to flirt the regime. So whoever has power, they are trying to attach themselves to. And you remember that relationship that they had with the Turks, with the Americans at a certain time, and now the Americans announced that they would be leaving. Later on, they decided that they would keep some forces for the oil fields. And those oil fields actually were exploited by the regime, by Daesh, by the Kurds, by the Qasad people. Right. And now what needs to be done is people deciding themselves what they need, not to be taken hostages by any other forces.
At the moment, Syria is like the free-for-all situation where every party that is involved there seems to be looking after their interests. Here in Turkey, with their offensive, Umar, now reaching almost a month in northeastern Syria, there's still a very uneasy truce prevails. Like you mentioned, the situation was very volatile, but there's a big concern also about the ISIS prisoners there. There are over 1,000. There are thousands of prisoners that are right now being watched by the SDF. Now, when Turkey is trying to repatriate some of these foreign fighters, there is a lot of resistance, especially from the UK, from the Netherlands, that have stripped them of their citizenship. Is this going to be the last sort of stumbling block, or do you feel that maybe at Washington this is going to finally be addressed?
I think Washington has tried as much as it can to sort of pressure these governments to take its citizens back. And in that sense, Donald Trump was partially right when he said that we can't keep waiting for these governments to take their people back, and we can't keep troops there to guard these people. These are the responsibilities of these European governments. So that's sort of ongoing, and that's it's like a very sad situation. There's actually 70 or 80,000 people that are involved here. Most of them are women and children and families of people. And then you have about 10,000 people that can be considered combatants. And out of those, you have about 1,000 people who are nationals of Western countries, of European countries, of North America, of Australia. So those people are sort of the big hot potatoes. What are you going to do with those people? The problem always sort of was that the SDF had control of these people. They had them under detention in northeastern Syria, but a lot of these governments didn't see the SDF as another legitimate state, so they didn't want to send their consular personnel there to process these people. They didn't want to talk to them in terms of setting up sort of an international criminal tribunal for these people. ISIS was sort of the worst of the worst that the world has seen in the last few years. So I guess in public minds in Europe, a lot of sympathy is gone for these people. But it's a real problem that we have to deal with in this region now.
But is there any clarity, Umar, what would happen to those who have been stripped of their citizenship by the UK, by Netherlands? If they are not going to be taken back, what is their future then?
Right now they're stuck where they are. So some of them are stuck in Syria, in SDF controlled camps. We have people like Shamima Begum, a British citizen. We have in Turkey, we have in prisons, we have an Australian citizen here, for example, Neil Prakash, who had his citizenship stripped by the Australians. And when people remove sort of citizenship from someone, they always say that, oh, this individual can get citizenship in a second country because of their ethnic background. But in all of these cases, we've seen that those other countries that they supposedly have links to have refused to, to acknowledge that. So these people for now are just stuck where they are. So there are talks going on, especially in the last few weeks since the Turkish operation in Syria, talks between European governments about what to do with people. But we see sort of the practice of stripping people of citizenship continuing. Just a few weeks ago, two Dutch citizens who escaped from an SDF-controlled detention camp in Syria made it all the way to Ankara in Turkey, and they went to the Dutch embassy. And they were hoping that would start the process of them being sent home. But actually, the Dutch stripped one of the women of their citizenship. And so now she's stuck in Turkey. And the other woman was extradited or will be extradited in the next few days. So this is sort of an ongoing problem.
An uneasy problem, because it really puts into question what would happen if they've already seen the withdrawal of their biggest ally, the US, the SDF. How long are they going to keep an eye on these Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Daesh prisoners in northeast Syria, where already infrastructure is crumbling? Dr. Yahya Al Aridi, with the kind of entanglement of regional players in northeast Syria, how would this affect the fate of these prisoners, affect the overall sort of peace and calm in the region of what one can expect in the future?
Well, as Omar said, that area is torn between different forces. And now this problem of Daesh that was with us for about 4 or 5 years, and now the remainings of those people who were detained by the SDF, and the threat that SDF would release some of them who are still in jail, also would create a more complicated problem for the region. That's one. Another thing also for the indigenous population over there, it is them who should decide their own destiny if there is will on the part of the United States, Turkey, and Russia, and at the same time the regime. But the regime is just trying to explode this whole thing of that area being fragmented, that area being torn up to promote, to further its own goals there. That's originally, that's from the very beginning. It just followed this strategy, and it's still doing the same thing. That region requires really some sort of a consensus on the part of the international community, something in the Security Council, a certain resolution that would settle this critical and sensitive region, which also contains the main economic resources of Syria in terms of water, in terms of oil, gas, and agriculture over there. And that needs to be settled with the different clashing interests of all those parties. I don't see it to be coming to any settlement, to any quietness, or to any or not taking care of any of the interests of the people there.
Well, essentially, Dr. Al Aridi, wouldn't it be that the Turkish forces, the Russians, the Syrian regime would have to all be at some point on the same page? And with this meeting coming up in Washington, D.C. with President Trump, could there be possibly any hope that their presence, the U.S. troops there in eastern Syria, that could finally be resolved?
Well, the last thing all those parties would think of are Syrian citizens, unfortunately. What their main concern was their own interests, and each one of the parties is in a certain clash with the other. The United States doesn't feel comfortable with the Russians, and likewise the Russians. The Turkey tries very hard to protect its national security, and sometimes it's in good terms with the United States, sometimes, and most of the time it's in good terms with the Russians, and also most of the time Turkey is torn between the United States and Russia, and with the regime being that bug out there which is waiting for the clashes of interests in order to penetrate into that area, because Assad was promised that he would have control over the geography in order to get some sort of legitimacy, and in reality no legitimacy whatsoever. The regime is protected by the Russians, by the Iranians, but but it plays at the expense of the disturbance, the clash of interests, and at the same time of the plight of the people is the one that promotes the regime's continuity or staying in power. Now, as I said, there must be some sort of international consensus, so there should be a settlement in that critical and sensitive region.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Yahya Al Aridi and Mr. Umar Farooq. Thank you for joining us, giving us your insight. Unfortunately, we've run out of time talking about what is unfolding in Syria and what can one expect in the next few days, especially with President Erdogan's visit to Washington, D.C. to meet President Trump. And with that, we've come to the end of the program. We'll see you tomorrow with new news stories and updates. Till then, goodbye.